We work with a lot of runners here at Revo Denver. And because we do, we see a lot of knee pain. That's the most common site of injury in runners across the world. And because we see a lot of knee pain in runners, we deal with a lot of patellar tendinopathy. Now, folks hear the word patellar tendinopathy, and they sort of tend to generalize it as pain around the knee. And that's really a misdiagnosis. And to illustrate, here's my extremely crude drawing. So here's your femur coming down, just your thigh bone. The patella is the circular bone here, and then your tibia or your shin bone coming up from the bottom. These green lines going down, that's your quadriceps tendon, which is continuous here with these green lines. Your patellar tendon really just references the location. When we're speaking about patellar tendinopathy, we are referring specifically to this area of this red circle here, where that patellar tendon inserts into the tibia. Patellar tendinopathy can be a really frustrating issue for runners to deal with because it can be very, very naggy if they don't address it early, number one, and if they don't modify their training to fit the issue, number two. So the PT really has to know how to navigate the early phases of this process so that they can keep the runner running, most importantly. And secondly, so that they can progress them through their running back to their normal training volume. Now, one of my favorite properties about tendons is that they respond positively to load, but too little or too much, and they won't improve. So we need to be specific and measurable in how we go about this. One of the favorite things that tendons love most, especially when they're most irritable, is isometric loading. And all that means is there's force being applied, but there's no motion incurred. All right. So I'm in this wall sit. I'm going to sit here for 30, 45 seconds. And I'm going to take a little break. I'm going to do that 3 or 4 times. This is version number 1. Then I'm going to go to a single leg wall sit. Say my right leg is the painful leg. I'm going to sit into the single leg wall sit again for 30 to 45 seconds. 3 to 5 times, resting 30 seconds, even up to 2 minutes in between my reps. There's a third version where we're getting knees over toes on the wall. This is a version of a sissy squat, but we have the wall for support. And you guessed it, 30 to 45 seconds, 3 to 5 reps, with 30 seconds to 2 minutes rest in between. The fourth exercise we start with is a Spanish squat. The big heavy band fixed around a rack or the base of a treadmill. And again, we're holding 30 to 45 seconds, 3 to 5 times, with 30 seconds to 2 minutes rest in between each repetition. The last thing we like to include in this isometric starter pack is single leg knee extension. Now, you may not always be able to get to a gym with the typical knee extension machine, and that's fine. You should be able to get a similar setup with similar effort, setting up a chair or a box against a wall. When you kick out, you want that knee to be 90 degrees or just a shade under that, or a little bit more open, okay? And when you kick in, that effort level should feel like about a 7 out of 10. Like you're working, but it's something you can confidently hold for 30 to 45 seconds. And again, similar to the other exercises we've discussed, we're going to rest 30 seconds to 2 minutes between those efforts, and we're going to do 3 to 5 of them. As you go through your rehab process, it's important to remember that tendons respond more to the rate of loading rather than the magnitude of load. That is to say, the faster we load the tendon, the more likely it is to respond in a negative way, which is why we have to start with those isometrics first. There's no speed to the load. but there is magnitude, and that magnitude should be high in that isometric phase. From that isometric phase, we move on to a heavy, slow loading phase, because again, it's more about the magnitude of the load rather than the rate. We want to sneak up on that rate of loading. And if you remember my crude drawing from the beginning of the video, you can see why, especially with that patellar tendon as it crosses the knee, why it's important to load it slowly first before it is important to move it quickly as with running or jumping. If we add a quick stretch to that tendon that's already irritated, it's not going to appreciate that. But if we add a heavy load and allow that tissue to figure it out and to adjust to that magnitude, then we can kind of sneak up on the tempo or the rate of loading. And while we often call this phase the heavy, slow loading phase, it's important to remember that evidence suggests that moderate resistance can actually be equally as effective. What's most important in this loading phase through a range of motion is that you select movements that are specific to your abilities and your sport, and that you're able to progress them throughout the duration of the phase. Now let's move on to phase 3, energy storage and release. Think about plyometrics, things like box jumps, death jumps. The possibilities that you could employ here are almost innumerable, but again, you want to make sure that these movements are specific to you and your abilities and your sport. Keep in mind that while we label this phase 3, you still may be working through parts of phase 2 with some heavy, slow loading, depending on how you're testing out objectively with your strength of your quadriceps, potentially even of your calf or of your glute max. What's important to remember as we enter into this energy storage and release phase of plyometrics is that we don't take our lifting to something that also is quicker and tempo based. It's okay to stay with heavy, slow loading for a while as you enter into this energy storage and release that tends to be much faster. What we don't want is to have too much tempo or rate of loading on the tendon so that it flares up again and we have to back up to stage 1 of isometrics to calm it down. So there you have it. Patellar tendinopathy rehab in a really small nutshell. Phase 1, isometrics. Pick 1 or 2 exercises, hold each for 30 to 45 seconds, 3 to 5 reps apiece, 1 to 2 sessions a day. Next phase is that heavy, slow resistance. Again, you're going to pick 1 to 2 movements, perform them 2 to 3 times a week, sets of 3 to 5. All right? Finally, that energy storage and release phase. Plyometrics, 2 to 3 sessions a week, 1 to 2 exercises that are relevant for your sport to get your bounce back and make sure that that patellar tendon can handle that rate of loading that we talked about earlier in the video.